Assalamualaikum and a very good day to everyone. Today's topic is on reporting on COVID-19 in Xinhua News, a comparative study between the first 10 weeks and after 3 months. The epidemic was first discovered in Wuhan, China in December 2019, and it became a global pandemic beginning 2020. As for now, there are about 25 million confirmed cases reported in more than 216 countries. This report focused on the comparing of the coverage of news on COVID-19 during the first 10 weeks and after 3 months. The main objective of this research is to compare news coverage in terms of news slant, category of news, and issue related to COVID-19. A content analysis was conducted on Xinhua News, and the first study was conducted end of December 2019 until March 2020, and the second study was conducted in May until July 2020. I'll go straight to the finding. In the first study of the pandemic, Xinhua News Agency were more inclined to cover the spreading issue initiatives taken and treatment in other countries. In terms of local news, the news published usually about the recovered patient, the treatment, and the search for vaccine, which is positive to the country. In the second study, a high of 86% were neutral news, related issue from other countries apart from China. These news were focusing on other countries which outbalance the number of local news. However, there is a small number of negative slanted news for China that was published by Xinhua. However, in the early phase of the pandemic, there was news related to xenophobia because people around the world are having prejudice towards the origin of the virus that was said to come from China. Over the course of time, this no longer becomes the issue as people are more concerned about other important COVID-19 matters. This is because this study found that news related to economy is increasing as many countries are having economic recession and some are trying to recover from it. In both studies, World Health covers the most by Xinhua. However, there is a slightly difference in the category of World Health, where this category were covered more in the second study rather than in the first study. The virus has been spread to most of the world, so it has become the main issue to be covered by any of the news agency in every country. Types of issues. There were several differences between issues covered by Xinhua in the first 10 weeks of the outbreak and after 3 months. The first 10 weeks issue on epidemic, isolation, outbreak, vaccine, virus, and Wuhan, Hubei. Then slowly the issue changed according to the degree of the pandemic. For example, in the first report, Xinhua covered many issues on Wuhan, Hubei because that's where the virus got started. While in the second observation, there were issues covered by Xinhua like cure, lockdown, medical aid, recovery phase, restriction, and supply aid. It can be seen that these new issues emerged into this period of study because these issues were trending during that period. For the first report, the period of study ends in March, while the second report ends in July. While the gap, there were many new issues as the government took action or made plans in controlling the pandemic. For example, the issue on lockdown and restriction. The finding also indicate that some issue in the first study remain the same as in the second study, like death, economy, health crisis, pandemic, and spreading. For instance, the issue on COVID-19 and spreading, the reason Xinhua covered less issue on COVID-19 is because in the first study it observed that 42% was on COVID-19, while in the second study Xinhua only covered 14%. People wanted to know the updates about the virus, which causes high number of deaths. This issue was covered more in the first 10 weeks because it was during the early part of the outbreak that people were panic and fear of COVID-19. In order to make people to remain calm, Xinhua posted many news on COVID-19 in the first report to ensure that the people get the latest information and cooperate well in fighting the virus. Thus, Xinhua covered many issues on COVID-19 in the first report because in that particular period, people were eager to gain information and latest updates about the virus that bring sudden change to the world compared to the second report. People were already adapt well with the new situation and new norms. As for the issue on spreading, the first report indicates only 5% and increased rapidly in the second study to 33%. This is due to the number of people affected by the virus was increasing outside of China. Xinhua was covering on the spreading of COVID-19 internationally than the local setting. Based on this study, Xinhua news coverage can be seen to exchange its focus from what has been observed in the first study. Some types of issues were not being covered and the coverage on other new issues were increasing over the time. Nonetheless, the same agenda was maintained by the agency in which the image of the country must be sustained in a positive way by publishing more positive news instead of negative news when it comes to local coverage. In addition, Xinhua also tends to cover more on global news rather than local news, which is consistent from the first study until the current study. Based on the findings, it shows that the coverage in terms of news, slant, category, and types of issues have changed from the previous study as the cases in China are decreasing at the moment. The local news agency has changed its focus to cover more international news in which this study has considered the news to be neutral slanted to China. As a result of this study, the news under the category of world health is being found to be the most published news throughout the study, leaving other categories of news with a huge gap. Then the pandemic that has spread to many countries has put the countries in various states depending on the effectiveness of the government in handling the pandemic. Hence, the news coverage has impact from this because it can be observed from the type of issues in this study were focusing on recovery phase, vaccine spreading and economics. This shows how different countries are facing different challenges in this pandemic and initiatives taken to recover. From the first study and the current study, it can be seen from the pattern of coverage where Xinhua news has changed. When the pandemic has reached a new phase, the focus of news coverage needs to change as well in order to give a dynamic overview regarding the pandemic that the world is facing right now. The agency cannot focus on the same issues as the new issues will keep arising from time to time. This explains the changing of the positive slanted news coverage from the first study to the neutral slanted coverage in this study. However, the category of news has not changed as we are analyzing the COVID-19 pandemic, which falls under the World Health category. Whereas for the type of issue, the analysis show the changes of nature in the pandemic news from spreading virus, epidemic, to the emergence of new issues such as medical aid, recovery phase, restriction, and supply aid. This shows that the world is moving to a different phase of the pandemic as some of the countries are still struggling to control the spreading. In the first study, priming theory was used to explain the coverage of Xinhua News Agency. A good image of the country was the main agenda which influenced the news coverage as has been found in the study. The current study also found that the news agency is still doing the same in maintaining the image of China by diverting attention to international news instead of local news. The local news published mainly focus on international relations, recovered patient, and also regarding China, helping other countries in combating COVID-19. This shows that the news agency in highlighting the news of pandemic in other countries are also positive local news in the national newspaper. The theory was applied when the government tried to instill the positive perception of China's reputation. When the early phase of pandemic, the media agency published many positive slanted news to portray the good image of China in combating the pandemic. Then the current study shows that the news coverage are more inclined to the neutral slanted news, international news, to divert the attention from China and publish few positive slanted news such as China giving supply to other countries to strengthen the positive image of the country. To sum up, news agencies such as Xinhua is serving the country to fulfill the government interest. China clearly used media power to promote their propaganda to its citizens and also people globally. China is also widely known as a country that hides many information from publics, as stated in the BBC News. Thus, this explains the pattern of news coverage that was biased to certain issues, categories, and news slant. It also can be concluded that the news coverage can change depending on the update of an issues, public interest, and also higher authority such as the government. Thank you.